Charlie is a great collector of models, and he's really good. Actually, the amazing thing about the way his brain works is how he can immediately like recall or bring to bear, 4 or 5 different models almost instantly. So he's practiced that a lot. But if you go through the book Poor Charlie's Almanack, the back of the book, they have the 10 great speeches he's given. And one of the speeches is the psychology of human misjudgment. And he modified that talk. The original talk was given at Harvard, and the original talk is on the internet, etc. So you don't even need to spend $2. You just ask God Google, and God Google will give you all of that content for free. And so I try to read that essay every year, and that essay contains a good 30 plus marks. And they give you that essay gives you a lot of insights into how our brains function, and that gives you a lot of big leg up in how you can figure things out, etc. Right? So for example, in that essay he talks about association tendency. Association tendency is used by companies like Coca-Cola, where Coca-Cola wants to be any place where humans are happy. So if there's the Olympics or the World Cup or the NFL or NFL game or a movie theater, any place where humans are happy, Coke wants to be there. And Coke is willing to do whatever it takes, loss leader, whatever, to be there for that purpose. And the association tendencies are very strong. So when we see Coke in a happy setting, it carries on to other areas of life where we want Coke with us because we think if we have a Coke, we're going to be happy, right? So Coke uses that in the advertising. They also use celebrities in their advertising, right? For the same reason. If some, you know, Brad Pitt is, drinking a certain brand of beer, that's the brand of beer I need to be drinking, and that sort of thing. And so he goes through a number of models. So I think it took Charlie probably 30 or 40 years of stumbling around in the darkness to come up with those particular models. He basically distilled it down in that talk. So what took him 30 or 40 years, you could absorb in a day or two, which is tremendous leg up on Charlie. And, so there are quirks in the wiring of the human brain. And it's very important to understand those quirks, because once you start understanding those quirks, you can get a huge leg up on other humans. So for example, humans have built in to our brains this reciprocation tendency that if someone does us a favor, we feel that we need to do them a favor. So the reciprocation tendency is built into most humans. And Charlie thinks it comes from going very way back in our evolutionary history. So when we lived in hunter-gatherer societies, and there was a hunter who brought down a big beast, right? He brings it to his small group. Now he cannot consume the whole beast himself, and there's no refrigeration. So what he does is he stores that meat in the bellies of his neighbors, and he invites them all to share in his feast. So later, when one of them brings down a beast, they know they're going to invite him. He knows he's going to get invited, right? And so it works. It's a win for everyone. But there's a quirk in the reciprocation tendency, is that because of the way our evolutionary brains evolved, the reciprocation tendency etched into our brain does not have a calibration engine. So I can remember that John did a favor for me, but I'm really not good at calibrating the size of the favor. And Cialdini talks about it, the psychology of persuasion, that salespeople use this all the time in a way to take advantage of people or, get more sales, etc. And I've used this tendency to increase assets in Pabrai funds, for example. So when a potential investor approaches me and says, hey, I'm interested in investing in Pabrai funds, for example, everything they need to make that investment could be sent to them by email, various documents and prospectus and disclosures and whatever, right? And they can look at that, etc. And we do that. We send them all the information digitally. But what we also do is we send them a physical package Okay. And the physical package has all the same documents in hard copy, but it also has some giveaways, right? So it has a book usually, and it has a very nice cross pen. Okay. And now when the person receives the package, he gets this very nice cross pen, which he never asked for, doesn't even want it, but it's there now, and the book is there. Now, maybe one or two out of 100 people I would send these packages to return the whole package to me with a note saying, "Thank you, Mr. Pabrai, for sending these documents and all these things. I decided it's not for me, and warm regards," right? Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to get rid of the reciprocation obligation. But for 98% of humans, there's too high a frictional cost to try to return that package. You got to go to UPS and all of that. It's a complicated thing. It's not so easy. And so if they don't return the package, now it's like they ate my meat. Okay. They ate the beast I gave them. And so they feel obliged. And if you feel obliged, then the minimum investment is a few $1,000,000. So you can send a few $1,000,000 and now we're even. And so the pen is equal to a few $1,000,000 because the brain cannot calibrate, right? And so that's a mental model that is useful. Now, there are used car salesmen, scumbag salesmen who take advantage of this in nefarious ways, right? But you can take advantage of it in very above board ways. And so being aware of these quirks in the way human brains are wired is going to give you an advantage in life. So as you go through life and as you learn about different things, and as you say, oh, like for example, one of the things that has helped me a lot is, I'm the shameless cloner, and I have still not figured out. So I know that humans, for whatever reason, have an aversion to cloning. They consider it beneath them. They think it's like cheating or whatever, right? I really don't know why there is a human aversion to cloning. What I do know is it definitely exists because a lot of people will look at something that somebody else is doing and they'll decide, oh, that's a good idea, but it's already been done. So there's no point me trying to copy it, or it won't work, whatever. They don't copy it. A really good example of that is, when I first ran into Chipotle, the restaurant we all love. So when I first ran into Chipotle, I loved it. It was great. I'm talking like about 20 years ago. And I used to go every day and have my lunch at Chipotle because I just creature of habits, keep it simple. And Chipotle had a particular innovation in the way Mexican food was being served, which is that they allowed extreme customization. And no two people in line ordered the same thing, right? And because of the way their whole assembly line was set up, it was very easy to customize, right? Because they just go down the line, ask you what you want, and you just keep telling them, and you go. And I said, this is a great innovation. I thought about it. I thought about 20 years ago, 22 years ago. I said, this is a fantastic innovation. Then I would go to Baja Fresh, okay? And they just give you some standard burrito or standard taco. You can tell them, oh, change this, that, but it's not a seamless experience. And Baja Fresh has not scaled. And what I couldn't figure out is I saw when there was Baja Fresh and I saw when there was Chipotle. And if I was the CEO of Baja Fresh, what I would have done is I would have just completely cloned Chipotle. I'd make everything the same, exactly the way Chipotle did. And there's room for more than one. Okay, there's not room for just one. And now, we have some other restaurants like Kava, etc., that have come up with the same concept with different kinds of food, right? But there could have been more of the same. Nobody really cloned McDonald's fries. Like, why are you not cloning those fries? Those fries are great. Okay, it's not rocket science. Let's clone it. Nobody cloned the Egg McMuffin. Why are you not cloning the Egg McMuffin? It's great. Okay, just because you didn't invent it doesn't mean you can't clone it. Okay, and so I find continuously around the world, when I look around, that there are so many opportunities, but for doing what has already been done. there's no need to make any changes to what has already been done, because there's room for 2 or 3 players or 4 players easily in what was already been done. But nobody does that. And that's just the way the world works. So embracing a mental model like cloning. So when I realized that humans have some weird aversion to cloning, what I said is, okay, Mohnish, if you become the shameless clone, right off the bat, you will have an advantage. Okay. And that advantage, because other people are not willing to do that, is going to give you a huge leg up. And I remember in 2012, I noticed that Berkshire Hathaway in their 13F filing had bought General Motors, General Motors stock. And I also noticed that I think it was David Einhorn who had bought GM stock. Okay. I always hated the car business. I think the car business is a horrible business, high capex, unions. We see what the unions are doing right now. And you're subject to consumer taste. And if something is even slightly off, they won't buy your car. And, all of these things is very competitive and all of that, right? It's a horrible business to be in. So I said, why would these smart people want to go into a business which is worse than having a root canal? Like, why would you want to invest in a stupid business like General Motors? And what I decided to do was I said, I'm just going to dig into this to understand what drugs these people were smoking. So I decided I was going to study GM to try to come up with an answer of why these smart people bought GM, right? And when I started to study it, I realized that the auto business had changed, and it had changed in a very major way. And I was not aware that it had changed. So what happened in the auto business is, in the financial crisis in 2008 and 09, GM and Chrysler went through bankruptcy. And when they went through bankruptcy, they got rid of their legacy liabilities. They got rid of their debt. They got cleansed out of all the sins of the past. And I read a book called Overhaul, which was written by Steve Ratner, who was the auto czar appointed by President Obama to basically fix the auto industry. And he was basically responsible for the US government bailout of GM and Chrysler and managing those companies to come back to health. And when I read his book, Overhaul, which is a great book to read, I realized that so every 5 years, like we are seeing right now, the UAW renegotiates their union contracts. And they have a lot of leverage because they'll go on strike. And if they go on strike, obviously the companies are in a lot of pain, right? Like, they've just struck so many of their plants and distribution centers. If you take your car in now, they can't get the parts because the distribution centers are all on strike. The people are all on strike. So in 2009, I think that the Auto Task Force in DC, Steve Ratner and his colleagues were going to Detroit to meet with some of the leaders of GM and Ford and GM and Chrysler and so on. And they had a meeting with the UAW at about 4 p.m. and their flight was going to be leaving at 5 p.m. So when they met the UAW, they said, look, we're going to redo the contracts because what is there in place right now is not sustainable. And they said that we've actually come up with a new contract with how things are going to work. And here is the new contract. And on the last page, you can sign, and then we can move on. So the UAW, basically the leadership told them that, listen, I don't think you understand how things work in Detroit. We appreciate that you come up with a new contract. We will take this and study it. And just for me seeing the first few paragraphs of what you've written, I can assure you none of it is going to be acceptable to us. And we will come back to you in a few weeks with a counter proposal, and then we'll go from there. Okay. So Steve Ratner says to the UAW leadership at that point, he says, my plane leaves in 40 minutes. And if in 35 minutes you have not signed this contract without so much as changing a comma, I will shut the city down tomorrow. So he said, I don't particularly care if you go on strike or not. And I don't particularly care whether you come to work or not. The companies need US government money to stay alive. And the US government is not going to be putting in a penny unless this contract is done exactly the way it's written. And the UAW for the first time in its history, signed that contract on the spot without changing a comma. And I went to God Google and I pulled up that contract. And it was the most orgasmic piece of reading that I had done in a very long time. And they are now fighting to take out those conditions that were put in 2009 that are still there in the contracts now. But what I realized when I read that contract is that Detroit used to be the best place on the planet to make cars. And the reason was that all the factors of production were right there. And the Great Lakes were right there to transport everything really cheaply. So you had huge iron ore deposits around the Great Lakes. You had huge coal deposits. You had huge steel mills. You had a huge auto parts industry, all in that Great Lakes ecosystem, very efficient transportation. And Detroit was one of the only places on the planet that has all of that stuff in one place. And then the labor became so extreme that it became the worst place to make a car. And the Koreans and the Japanese and all of them took over that industry, became a lot more efficient. And what had happened with that revised contract is that Detroit had again become the best place to build a car. And I realized that there was a major change. So I went from hating the auto industry to loving the auto industry just because I had no aversion to cloning. And I just decided that even though I have to hold my nose and read up on GM, I'll hold my own nose and read up, okay, just to understand. And then what actually ended up happening is that, which is another thing, a great model is sometimes you will see a company and you don't understand why some investor made that investment. You study it, but then you find another company in the same industry that's even better. So I studied GM, I studied Ford, and I studied Chrysler. And then I realized when I studied Chrysler, that Fiat Chrysler there'd been an acquisition by Fiat, was an incredible business because they had a rock star manager, Sergio Marchionne. And if, in hindsight, I sold too soon. That's why I say that, these compounders. So the entire market cap of Fiat Chrysler in 2012 was $5 or $6 billion. It was a company with 135 billion in revenue, with 5 billion of market cap. And it had been cleansed. A lot of the debt was gone. And within that 5 or 6 billion was 80% of Ferrari. And Ferrari, if you look at it today, has a $50-60 billion market cap. So they went public a few years later. So the stock was at $5 or $6. Basically, Ferrari is about $300 a share right now. At that time, the effective value of Ferrari was about $15 a share. That was embedded in there. So I never paid much attention to Ferrari because I was interested in the Ram franchise and the Jeep franchise, which was so strong. And the Ram and Jeep franchise were both capable of producing more than 5 billion a year in cash flow. So I had a business which was at 5 billion market cap. You had two franchises. You could eliminate the rest of the business and you would be making 10 billion a year. But they also had the minivan franchise, which was also really good. And they owned Maserati and they owned Alfa Romeo. There were a whole bunch of other things that they owned. And they own Ferrari and they own these parts companies and all of that. So in the end, this 5 billion market cap, when you ran it through, became more than 100 billion between Ferrari and the rest of the pieces. And it all came out of basically, because I took a position, I took a 10% position, I held it and so on. It all came out of wanting to understand why someone did something. And I realized that nobody else would do that. Nobody else would actually look at GM that Ted Wexler bought and ask the question, why, right? And so it's really important. So if you look at the Berkshire Hathaway portfolio today, very recently, they have bought a bunch of home builders, Lennar and Pulte and a few others. They probably bought a bunch because the amount of money they want to put in, they needed a basket. And I know that if you study it, you will come to an aha moment. Because what the Lennars of the world have started doing is they've copied, finally, after more than 20 years, they've copied the NVR model. So aversion to cloning, NVR, the home builder, which had a great model, they bought back like 85% of their stock, they stopped issuing dividends and all that. It took these other home builders. NVR in the last 25 years has been an 800 bagger. Okay, it's gone up 800x. It's a stupid home builder. Okay, it's not Chat GPT or something. Okay, so it's gone up 800x. And the others in the industry, for more than 20 years, they watched them do so much better than them. And none of them adopted that model. Till finally, after 25 years, they said, I can't take it anymore. And they finally succumbed after 25 years. And now they've started cloning the NVR model. And I think Berkshire saw that. And they said, let's go party. So that's another model that can be helpful.